أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي ربنا زدنا علما اللهم فقهنا في الدين إلهي آمين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. I welcome all of you to our Ramadan series 2024, and inshallah today we'll be covering Juzz number 16. So just to give you a quick recap, last time we covered two Makki surahs, Surah Isra and Surah Kahf. And subhanAllah, in Surah Al-Kahf, there are altogether 4 stories that were mentioned in Kahf. The story about the sleepers of the cave and the story about a man with 2 gardens. So that's what we covered last time. Inshallah, today we will cover 2 of the other remaining stories. So let's go ahead and do that. So what do we have in this juz? A quick overview of this juz. This juz is going to have 3 surahs. The remaining portion of Kahf, about 75 ayat, Surah Al-Maryam, a complete surah, and Surah Taha as well, a complete surah. So all these 3 surahs are going to be Makki surahs, meaning they were revealed to the Prophet ﷺ before migrating to Medina. So inshallah, let's begin. We will continue from the story of Prophet Musa alayhi salam and his meeting with Khidr. And the background to the story can be found in Hadith literature, where Musa alayhi salam delivered a speech before Bani Israel, who questioned him as to who is the most learned person on earth. And of course, being the prophet of Allah of that time, he replied, I am. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reprimanded Musa alayhi salam for this assumption and instructed to meet someone who was more knowledgeable than Moses. And subhanAllah, here we see the humility of Prophet Musa alayhi salam, that despite knowing the fact that he's one of the Ulul Azm prophets, having a great status, he still sets out on this journey to seek knowledge. And of course, we come to know from these ayat that the journey was long and exhausting, but subhanAllah, Musa alayhi salam stayed patient throughout, and he was in fact very zealous to acquire knowledge. And the person who accompanied Prophet Moses on the boat with him was Yusha bin Nun, a youth who was an assistant of Prophet Moses right now, a righteous student, but later on he will be given prophethood. So what happened? Both of them set out on the journey to meet Khidr. Now Musa alayhi salam has never met Khidr alayhi salam. So what's the clue? How is he going to recognize him? One of the signs given to Moses through revelation was that when you reach the junction of the 2 seas, you will lose your fish, meaning the meal you brought with you to eat. The moment you lose it, that is the place where you will meet Khidr. And this story is a gold mine in terms of lessons from the perspective of student and teacher. Subhanallah. Because when we look at Musa alayhi salam, first of all, the lesson for us is that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned to him about Khidr alayhi salam, that there is a slave of mine who's more knowledgeable than you, Musa alayhi salam's reaction wasn't like Iblis, that how come he's better than me? I'm not going to accept him. I'm going to, in fact, avenge him. Musa alayhi salam stayed humble throughout and went to seek knowledge from him. Also, we see that when we set out to seek knowledge, we have to sacrifice in terms of our comfort zone. We have to take out time in order to seek knowledge, plus the hardships of travel as well. Musa alayhi salam did not even think twice, and he set out on this blessed journey. So the lesson for us to learn over here is that knowledge comes with sacrifice. Sacrifice of food, at times sacrifice of sleep, sacrifice of comfort, but of course it has huge rewards. One of the Salaf al-Salihin, Umar bin Abdul Aziz, also known as the 5th Khalifa of Islam, he said, become a scholar if you're able to. If you're not able to, then become a student. If you cannot, then show love for them. If you are unable to do that, then at least do not hate them. SubhanAllah. So that's a beautiful set of advice for all of us. So moving on with the story, Musa alayhi salam finally meets Khidr. Now the question is, who is Khidr? There's a difference of opinion regarding it. Some say he was a prophet, while others say he was an angel. But anyways, let's not delve into that because Quran doesn't mention that to us. So when Musa alayhi salam met Khidr, there were some instructions given to Prophet Moses. Khidr said that as you come along with me, I am going to do certain things, but no matter what I do not question me. Just observe. And subhanAllah, we learn the importance of shadowing over here. And this teaches us that if there is an institution, as students, we have to abide by the restrictions. So Musa alayhi salam agreed, and now they both embark on this journey. And on the way, Khidr defected the boat of a poor man. And Moses, being the prophet of Allah, he questioned, how can you oppress someone like that? Why would you do that? And Khidr asked, didn't I tell you not to question me? And Musa alayhi salam apologized, and they move on. Next, Musa alayhi salam noticed that Khidr killed a young boy, an innocent boy. Again, he knew that this was against the rules of Sharia. And again, being a prophet, he couldn't help but ask, why did you kill an innocent boy? Khidr reminded him again regarding his policies that no questions asked. Otherwise, there will be separation between us. So now Musa alayhi salam realized that this is his final chance. So he better not ask anything. So they both kept traveling until they reached a city whose people were not very hospitable to them. So Khidr found a broken wall, so he repaired it. And Musa alayhi salam asked that these people didn't even give us a sip of water. Why would you offer them help? It doesn't even make sense. So now this was the time Khidr announced that there will be parting between the two of us. He mentioned to Moses that whatever actions I did, it was based upon divine guidance and there was wisdom behind it. So what was the wisdom behind it? Let's go ahead and discuss that. So in this passage from ayah 79 to 82, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the interpretation behind this. So the wisdom behind this act was that there was a king who was confiscating every single ship, meaning he was oppressing the poor. Had the ship been in good condition, the poor fisherman would have lost his boat completely. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala planned to give the fisherman a lesser degree of trial in order to save him from a bigger calamity. Subhanallah. Again, what's the lesson in this for us? At times we go through a minor surgery or a minor car crash, loss of wealth, and we complain, we whine. But subhanallah, we don't realize that even that minor test is a blessing for us. Perhaps Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is protecting us against a major harm. In terms of the boy who was killed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knew that this boy is going to grow up to be a tyrant disbeliever and compel his righteous parents towards shirk. So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willed that he be taken away and he is replaced with a righteous son. A righteous son was given to the parents. Again, what's the lesson for us? At times we invoke Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala immensely for something, whether it's a job, marriage, child, and yes, our dua is answered. But then all of a sudden, a calamity hits us and that beloved one is taken away from us. Again, in this narration, we come to know that these parents long to have a child. So they made so much dua to have a child. And when they did, he died. Why? Because Khidr killed him. What was the wisdom behind it? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to give them a better child, a better offspring, a righteous child. So in situations like these, again, we should remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows what's best for me. If a woman goes through a miscarriage, or perhaps there is a couple who go through a death of one of their children. Again, for that time, it seems very painful for us. And subhanAllah, we're not able to understand the wisdom behind it. But let's remember that I do not know. It is only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who knows what's best for me. So let's not complain. In terms of the wall that was repaired, it's mentioned that the property of two orphan boys was hidden over there. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willed that a wall is constructed over it so the property of these orphans can be secured till the time they reach adulthood. It's mentioned again that the property of the orphans was taken care of because their father was a righteous man. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protected their property. And this teaches us that righteousness of parents do benefit children. So as parents, we need to live on taqwa. We have to live a life of God consciousness. This is something that not just benefits us, but our children as well. But unfortunately, today we compromise on our prayer, on our salah, just for whose sake? For our children. We think we're investing in their future, but the fact of the matter is we're not. We're in fact risking it. So let's preserve our children's future. Let's invest in them by increasing in our piety, by increasing in our good deeds. And notice over here that the father's piety is mentioned over here, not the mother's, which shows that even one parent's piety is sufficient as well. Because at times there is oppression. No marriage is perfect. So perhaps a divorce took place and the child is handed to one of the parents. No matter whether you are with your child or not, don't worry. Just remember this ayah that if you hold on to the Quran, if you continue doing amal salih, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take care of your child. So all those girls, all those women who are single, again, make sure when you are considering someone for marriage, look for someone who isn't just a successful businessman, but he's also someone who's close to Allah. That's not just good for you, but it's gonna groom the future of your children as well. So the summary of the entire story is that Musa alayhi salam had knowledge, yet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted him to meet Khidr. Why? Because the fact of the matter is that we cannot learn everything from lectures, from books and audio tapes. There is a part of learning which is only accomplished through experiencing certain incidents, via shadowing someone. And that's why every life incident is a blessing for us because it gives us a chance to learn, to improve, and groom ourselves. So before we go on to the next story, I wanted to introduce you to the student of Prophet Moses, Yusha bin Nun, commonly known as Prophet Joshua alayhi salam. So who is Yusha bin Nun? Yusha bin Nun is not really mentioned in the Quran directly, except for the passage that we discussed and another ayah in Surah Ma'idah. So I just wanted to take a few minutes to introduce you to him. Basically, he was a student of Prophet Musa alayhi salam, who was a youth when he accompanied Musa alayhi salam in this journey. When Musa alayhi salam passed away, the leadership of Bani Israel passed on to Yusha bin Nun. So he is the prophet who leads Bani Israel to their ancestral land, the blessed land of Palestine. When Prophet Joshua and Israelites started to fight with the tyrants who were in Palestine, it was an intense battle. However, the sun was about to set. If the sun had set, then they would enter Saturday, on which fighting was forbidden for them. So Prophet Joshua pointed to the sun and he said, O sun, you are receiving orders and I am receiving orders from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ya Allah, stop the sun. And subhanallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala caused the sun to stop for Yusha bin Nun until he defeated the people of Jerusalem. Subhanallah, a very important lesson for us to learn over here from the story of Prophet Joshua. What we learn is that the initial instruction to enter the promised land of Palestine was given to Prophet Moses. But when Prophet Moses asked Bani Israel to enter the promised land, what did they say? They said, you and your Lord fight, we're going to sit right here. So what happened as a result of their disobedience, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made them to wander for 40 years. They couldn't settle in a place. Till the point Prophet Musa alayhi salam died, that entire generation of the Israelites died, and then their progeny, who raised up, who were nurtured, facing hardship of the desert, they entered the promised land under the leadership of Prophet Joshua. So this teaches us that despite the fact that Prophet Moses was the one who wanted to enter the blessed land of Jerusalem, his dream wasn't really fulfilled in his lifetime. His dream was fulfilled in the lifetime of Prophet Joshua, his student. And this tells us that our task is to just make an intention, supplicate, and try our best. It is not necessary that our dream will be fulfilled in our lifetime. Our supplication will be answered when we're alive. It's very much possible that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can fulfill our intention via someone else, through someone else. Perhaps our children, perhaps their children. We don't know. As long as our intention is sincere, inshallah, we will be rewarded for it. So moving on to the next story mentioned in Surah Kahf, we learn about a story about a powerful king by the name of Dhul Qarnayn. Who was he? He was a king who possessed power, wealth, and authority. And subhanAllah, when a person is given all this, it's very much possible that he could have used his resources for self-indulgence and entertainment, but instead, he used them to set out on travel and help the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. SubhanAllah, many a time we think that just because we're too rich or we're highly intellectual, there are certain tasks that are below our dignity, right? For instance, we'll be more than happy to be a team leader or a board member, but if help is required to clean a masjid or carry out the funeral rites of a dead body, we feel uncomfortable about it and we shy away, right? But from the story of Dhul Qarnayn, we learn that he came across a people who needed help to build a barrier between them and Gog and Magog, Yajuj and Majuj. He could have ordered his guards to do the task for him. He could have ordered his soldiers to fulfill the task for him, but we see his humility that he himself aided them till the task was accomplished. Just like Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam constructed Masjid Quba, Masjid Nabwi along with Sahaba. He didn't just relax and gave orders to them. And subhanAllah, Dhul Qarnayn helped these people and he didn't even take any compensation for it. He offered his services for free. Why? Because he wanted to seek the pleasure of Allah. This shows who is a true leader. A real leader is not a taker. A real leader is a giver. He's not just a recipient. He wants to give people and serve people. Dhul Qarnayn was not going out for expeditions to make money, by the way. He went out to serve humanity. And this is something we learn as well, that when we cook for others, teach others, or work for others, we shouldn't always do it for compensation. Sometimes we should just do it voluntarily to please Allah. Another leadership quality we learn over here is that he did not do everything himself. He made the people work with him. So let's not just always try to be a one-man show. SubhanAllah, many a time we start something and we want to do the complete task all by ourselves. It is permissible to assign tasks. It is all right to take help. And this happens in workplaces or even at home. As moms, we want to do everything. But at the end of the day, we feel exhausted. So it's okay to delegate some tasks to the kids so that this way they learn as well. And of course, there is barakah in teamwork. So moving on to ayah number 99. This story mentioned to us about Gog and Magog. So the question is, who are they? Who are Yajuj and Majuj? They are one of the signs of the Day of Judgment. And according to Islamic belief, currently they are alive behind the barrier that Dhul Qarnayn created for them. But when the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes, they will emerge and create a lot of havoc on earth. And when that happens, it is a sign that the Day of Judgment is soon about to happen. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from all that fitan. Ayah number 104. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قُلْ هَلْ نُنَبِّئُكُمْ بِالْأَخْسَرِينَ أَعْمَالًا الذين ضل سعيهم في الحياة الدنيا وهم يحسبون أنهم يحسنون صنعا. Allah mentions to us about the greatest losers. Who are they? Whose efforts were wasted. Why? Either because they were not performed with Iman or because their intention was corrupt. So let's remember that when we perform good deeds, it's not just the good deed that matter, intentions matter too. So the charity we give to show people how generous we are, or the social work we do with the intention of receiving accolades, all that is going to be wasted, according to this ayah, if our intention isn't to seek the pleasure of Allah. Rather, our intention is to please people. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the biggest losers. Who are they? When they put in their efforts, they try their best, they exhaust themselves in order to accomplish a goal, but because their intention is not sincere, their entire reward is wasted, canceled out, and nullified. So that's a warning given to all of us that when we do something, we should check our niyyah. We should check our intention. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from riyah. Ameen. Ayah number 110. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to say, I'm a human being like you. Meaning the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is being instructed to tell the disbelievers of Mecca that I am just a human like you. My mission is only one, to call you towards Tawheed. So if you wish to seek the pleasure of Allah, then prepare for your hereafter. Do good and send towards your akhirah bank account. And this is a reminder for all of us that subhanAllah, whoever hopes to meet his Lord, let him work righteousness. Because when we do good, we're basically doing for our own selves. In ahsantum, ahsantum li anfusikum. When we do good, we do it for our own selves. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us good intentions, to keep our rewards steadfast so that we're able to seek the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when we meet him. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Some of the action points of Surah Kahf. The fact is that Surah Al-Kahf is a sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ to be recited on the day of Jum'ah. And subhanAllah, today is the day of Jum'ah. Why are we recommended to recite this surah? Because it serves as a protection against the false Messiah, Ad-Dajjal. So the question is, how so? Because in this surah, we learn about four stories. The people of the cave, this teaches us the trial of faith. How is it related to Dajjal? Because Dajjal is one of the signs of the day of Qiyamah. We come to know from the narration of the Prophet ﷺ that Dajjal will possess extraordinary powers. When he comes, he will kill people and resurrect them again. He will tempt people to worship him instead of Allah. So yes, just like the people of the cave were tested, people are going to be tested in future with Dajjal. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect our faith. The owner of the two gardens, that story taught us about the trial of wealth. And subhanAllah, we come to know that when Dajjal comes, he will order the earth to uncover its hidden treasures. So people would feel attracted towards it and obey Dajjal in every way. So it would be a time where people will be tested with their wealth. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us. The third story that we learn in this surah was about Prophet Moses and Khidr. This was a trial of knowledge. And again, when we connect this to Dajjal, Dajjal, when he comes, he will be the biggest liar. And he will deceive people by giving them false information. So it's going to be a trial of knowledge. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us. And the fourth story that we learn in the surah was about Dhul Qarnayn. And from the story, we learn about trial of power and authority. And when we connect this to Dajjal, Dajjal will use power and oppression to persecute people. So meaning he will use his power in order to take people under his control. And many people will obey him and become subservient to him. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us against the fitan of Dajjal. Moving on to the next surah, Surah Maryam. SubhanAllah, beautiful surah. I highly recommend you to listen to this surah from one of your favorite qaris because it has a beautiful rhythm to it. So the context of Surah Maryam is that, subhanAllah, it was again revealed to the Prophet ﷺ at a time when oppression was on its peak. It was revealed in the 4th year of prophethood, and at this point of time, the Muslims were undergoing a lot of oppression. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed this beautiful surah in order to instill hope in the hearts of the Muslims that yes, there were other prophets who went through similar tests and trials. So be patient. And subhanAllah, we do come to know that when the Muslims migrated to Abyssinia, some of these ayat were recited to the Christian king Najashi and moved him to tears. So we should ask ourselves, does this surah bring me to tears? And of course, this surah stands as a beacon of hope for all those Muslims now who are undergoing oppression and affliction. And it teaches all of us that the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is near. SubhanAllah, many of the people in the Muslim society believes that the recitation of Surah Maryam eases childbirth. Or there's this another myth that the recitation of Surah Yusuf makes a woman give birth to a beautiful boy. Well, the Quran and Hadith contains no evidence for this, so we cannot really base our conviction without solid facts. However, there are lots of beautiful supplications mentioned in the Quran and Sunnah that we can make for our children. And this surah does highlight beautiful qualities that we should supplicate for our children. So what are they, inshallah? Let's begin the surah and see. Ayah number 1 and 2, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Kaf ha ya ayn sad. ذكر رحمة ربك عبده زكريا. Kaf ha ya ain sad, a mention of the mercy of your Lord towards his servant Zachariah. So this surah starts off with the mention of Prophet Zakaria alayhi salam. And the scene presented to us is the time when he was making silent plea to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The way how he's making dua is also something important to note because he's mentioning about his state of weakness, because he mentions to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala about his condition, that his condition is deteriorating. His bones have become weak and his head is inflamed with gray hair. And subhanAllah, in any way, whether it is our health or our financial stability, we're going downhill. This attitude, the way Zakaria alayhi salam makes dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, teaches us that no matter what difficulty we're going through in life, we should never lose hope. We should continue to make dua because we never know, a miracle might just happen. So we should trust Allah. And notice the way, subhanAllah, he calls out to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by saying that, Ya Allah, I have never been unhappy in calling upon you. Meaning he's so optimistic that he's remembering all the times that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has answered his invocations. Subhanallah, why don't we call out to Allah in such a manner? Because subhanAllah, the way we ask is, subhanAllah, that we're always counting the number of times our dua wasn't answered. It wasn't given to us. So we start off with a very negative attitude, and that's why we face the consequences of it. So inshallah, let's supplicate with husn zan, with positivity, so that we can see the positive results of it. Ayah number 7 to 11. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions to us the scene when the supplication of Zakaria alayhi salam is accepted. Meaning Zakaria alayhi salam wanted to have an heir, a child who can carry the legacy of prophethood after him. And subhanallah, he was very old and he was almost losing hope to have children. But because he kept making dua to Allah, sincere dua, so his dua was answered. An angel visited him and gave him the glad tidings that he is going to have a son who's going to become a prophet. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself has named this child. So we call him Yahya, but mostly the Christians know him as John the Baptist. So by the way, when we mention about Zakaria alayhi salam, who is Prophet Zachariah? He was from the lineage of Prophet Sulaiman alayhi salam, and he was the maternal uncle of Mary. And subhanAllah, he served as an imam of Masjid al-Aqsa in Quds, Jerusalem. And after that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose him to be a prophet for the Israelites. So basically, he wasn't given a new Sharia because he followed the Sharia of Musa alayhi salam. And we come to know that Zakaria alayhi salam was skilled in carpentry. So Zakaria alayhi salam, Yahya, and Isa alayhi salam were from the last generation of prophets and messengers, descending from the lineage of Ishaq alayhi salam. So again, who is Zakaria alayhi salam? Zakaria alayhi salam was an imam of his time, and he didn't really belong to a very rich clan. But he was given prophethood, he was given honor through prophethood, and his mission was to visit the masjid daily and give sermons, give khataras and religious reminders to people. It's mentioned that he almost reached his 90s and he had become very feeble. So his major concern was to bring the Muslim Ummah, the Israelites of that time, towards guidance. That's the reason why he longed to have a child. And since he was the guardian of his niece Maryam alayhi salam, he often saw miracles happening with her, like the fact that she would receive winter fruits in summer and summer fruits in winter. So looking all that, he made dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that, Ya Allah, if Maryam can receive out of season fruits, Ya Allah, you can bless me with a child, even though I'm out of season, I'm old and weak. And subhanallah, his supplication was answered. Now, subhanallah, what was a sign for him that his dua is answered? Generally, when a woman conceives a child, what happens? She misses her period. That's the sign of pregnancy, right? But what if a woman is already post-menopause? She doesn't even get any period. What's the sign for her to know that she's pregnant? So Zakaria alayhi salam said, Ya Allah, appoint a sign for me so that I may know that my wife is pregnant. And it was said that your sign will be that you will not be able to speak to people for 3 days and night. And during these 3 days, you should glorify Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, speak to others with gestures only. And that's exactly what Zakaria alayhi salam did. However, the Israelites of that time indulged in mischief making and wickedness. They not only ignored the teachings of Prophet Zakaria alayhi salam, but tortured him as well. So one day, they decided to assassinate him. And Zakaria alayhi salam, when he came to know about their plan, their evil plot, he hid under a tree. But the evil ones among them found him and cut the tree into half, thereby cutting Zakaria alayhi salam into half. So Zakaria alayhi salam is one of those prophets mentioned in the Quran about whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that amongst the Israelites, there were some who killed their own prophet. And Zakaria alayhi salam is one of them. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy on him. So what happened next in the story? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions to us about his son, Yahya alayhi salam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that we gave him wisdom from childhood. We taught him the scripture and sympathy from us and purity. He was devout. He was kind. So qualities are being mentioned over here that we as parents should definitely highlight in our mushaf and supplicate for our children each time we make dua for our kids. So number one, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala highlights the quality of Hannan. That Yahya alayhi salam was Hannan. Hannan refers to that tender, gentle love that a mother has towards her child. That's the kind of love Yahya portrayed towards his parents. Subhanallah. Number two, he was taqiyya, meaning he was so devout that he would never lift his eye to look at a woman with lust. And subhanallah, he never got married. So subhanallah, chastity is something that we should ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless us and our children. Quality number three, barram biwalidayhi. He was extra kind and compassionate towards his parents. Bir means goodness that's extensive. So again, that's something we should ask for our children. وَلَمْ يَكُنْ جَبَّارًا. He wasn't someone who was oppressive. And it's mentioned that at the time of Prophet Zakaria alayhi salam, children started mistreating their parents. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted him a child who can serve as an example and role model for others. And subhanAllah, why do you think Allah mentions these qualities in the Quran to us? Because unfortunately, despite living in the 21st century, we're facing the same predicament. So a little insight about Prophet Yahya alayhi salam. Who is he? SubhanAllah. Again, he's the son of Zakaria alayhi salam, as we mentioned before. And he was a model of piety since childhood. He was so devout that it's mentioned in the tafasir that he would dig up his own grave. He would dig his own grave and sit inside and weep. Why would he do that? In order to remember the day of judgment. SubhanAllah. That's how much devout he was, that he would have marks of tears on his cheeks because of excessive crying. Now, when Zakaria alayhi salam was killed, of course, the mission of prophethood came to him, came upon him. So he instructed the Israelites to perform 5 things: worship Allah without associating partners to him, perform salah, fast, give charity, and remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Do a lot of dhikr. And subhanAllah, one of the major sins that were being practiced at that time was incest. What is incest? The sin when a person wants to have sexual relationship with his own mahram. So this was the sin that was common at that time. And the king wanted to get married to his niece. However, when the matter was taken to Prophet Yahya alayhi salam so that he can give a fatwa regarding it, Prophet Yahya reminded them that this is forbidden upon you because she is your mahram. So both of you cannot get married to each other. So the girl who was the niece of the king, of course, she wanted to get married to her uncle because she aspired to become the queen. She wanted to possess wealth and honor. So what did she say? She said to the king, her uncle, that the only obstruction in our marriage is this man, Yahya. If you can present to me the head of Yahya in dowry, then I will marry you. So Yahya alayhi salam was executed by the king and beheaded. So subhanallah, he died as a martyr too, just like his father. Subhanallah. Just imagine the crimes that the Israelites committed against their own prophets who came to remind them about the teachings of Islam. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide all of us. Ameen. Next passage, ayah 16 till 21, mentions to us about Maryam alayhi salam. So there's a change of scene. And of course, why is it so? Because this surah is named after Mary. And who is Mary? She is a woman who is held in high esteem in Islam. She's the only woman mentioned by name in the Quran. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions to us the chastity of Maryam. So the camera shifts to Maryam. The scene that's being presented to us is the time when she was in solitude and an angel appeared to her. How did the angel appear? Because she's not a prophet. The angel appeared in a disguise of a handsome young man. And generally speaking, when there is a young girl sitting in isolation and the opposite gender appears, what happens? Opposite gender attracts, right? So this was a test for Maryam. And indeed, it is a test for any person who's alone, who's young, and who's unmarried. So the test came to Maryam alayhi salam. However, she passed this test. As soon as she saw this young, handsome, good-looking man in her room, she said, she said, I seek refuge in Ar-Rahman against you. I seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala against you. And that's when the angel proclaimed, I am an angel and I am here to give glad tidings to you of a son. And of course, her immediate response was, how can I have a son when no man has ever touched me? And the angel responded, قال كذلك قال ربك هو علي هين. Meaning just like that. كذلك. It's so easy for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. By the way, when we talk about Maryam alayhi salam, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam has informed us that there were many men who achieved perfection and none were perfect among women except for Asiya, the wife of Fir'aun, and Maryam, the daughter of Imran. So the reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions about Mary in multiple places in the Quran is because she is one of an exemplary woman, a role model for all of us. So we should definitely learn life lessons from her. So from ayah 22 till 26, there is a time lapse. So basically Maryam went through the entire pregnancy. And now the scene presented to us is the time when she's experiencing labor pains. And for those of us who have experienced it, we all know how painful it is. But Maryam alayhi salam's test is more high, more intense, because she has no help, no moral support, no family members, no mentorship. So she was in so much pain, physically and emotionally, that she said, I wish that I had died before this, or I wish I had become a thing forgotten. Now we could think to ourselves, how come Maryam, being a model of piety, can say something like that? And subhanAllah, we need to remember that after all, no matter how much virtuous she was still a human being. And physical pain and emotional turmoil is something that can make a person utter words like that. So she was going through a lot of anguish because, of course, it was a question of her reputation as well. She was concerned how to face her people with the child. So basically, lots of emotions were going, waving up and down in her heart. That's when a voice called out from beneath her, saying, لا تحزن, do not grieve. The help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is here. Now, when we try to zoom into the scene of Maryam alayhi salam delivering baby Isa alayhi salam, one thing to notice over here is that Maryam alayhi salam did not receive a platter of food as she was receiving in Quds, just like she received out-of-season fruits when she was sitting in her mihrab. It was definitely possible for Allah to do this, right? But this time it was different. She was asked to shake the tree in order to get the dates. Teaching us what? Then when we want something, some accomplishment, we have to put in some effort. Miracles do not always happen. So we see that even in extreme hardship and difficulty, we still have to adopt the means. Now, the question is why dates? Because dates are very nutritious. That's why the Prophet ﷺ recommended us to do suhoor and iftar with dates. So Maryam alayhi salam was told to do a vow of silence. After she ate the dates, she delivered baby Isa alayhi salam. A stream of water was given to her. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells Maryam to do a vow of silence and then face her people. And this was allowed in their Sharia. Why was she told to do that? Because Maryam alayhi salam was afraid that what are the people going to say to me? There will be a rain of accusations coming towards me. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells her, adopt silence. And this is a golden rule for many things. If someone accuses us regarding something that we didn't do, silence is the best remedy. Give them time. Be patient and make dua. And inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will vindicate you soon. So what happened next? Isa alayhi salam is born and Maryam alayhi salam holds baby Isa alayhi salam in her arms and goes back to Quds. And the Israelites saw her with a baby. This was a dramatic scene, climax. And when they saw her with a child, they didn't spare her, even though she's the daughter of Imran, a well-known, reputable family at that time, respectable to everyone. Yet, they didn't spare her. They started throwing snide remarks at her. But what did she do? She remained silent and she pointed towards the baby. And the people were like, what? You want us to talk to a child who cannot even speak? That's when the miracle happened. The baby spoke. And this is the unique quality of Isa alayhi salam mentioned over here. The fact that he spoke in his cradle. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions to us that he is mubarakan. He is blessed. And this is the dua that we should make for ourselves, that Ya Allah, enable me and my children and my family members to be mubarakan, beneficial, useful, helpful to others wherever we go. If we set such a high standard, then inshallah, our children will follow the same legacy as well. So Isa alayhi salam comes to Bani Israel as a prophet. And he commands them to pray. He commands them to give charity. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that he was kind to his mother. Now, why is this attribute specially mentioned over here? To show us that this is one of the highlighted actions that can enable us to access Jannah. Once a man came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and said, Ya Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who among the people is the most worthy of my good companionship? The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam repeated, your mother. Subhanallah. So we may be very kind and compassionate towards our friends, colleagues, relatives, but subhanallah, with our own parents, with our own mother, we may be very rude, ill-mannered, and harsh-hearted. So this is a reminder for each one of us that we need to be kind and compassionate towards our parents, because this is haqq upon the parents. This is something we have to do. And this is a wake-up call for all of us. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive us for our shortcomings and guide us all. Ameen. So a change of scene is presented over here. Example of Ibrahim alayhi salam is given. Why? Because Ibrahim alayhi salam is one prophet that none of the major world religions have any issues about. Whether Jews, Christians, or Muslims, we all accept Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam as our ancestral father. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala presents to us the scene when he invited his father to Islam. He addresses him with utmost respect by saying, Ya abati. Again, this teaches us that as children, if we feel that we're more knowledgeable than our parents, and of course, Ibrahim alayhi salam was more knowledgeable than his father Azar, if we have such a feeling in our heart, in terms of whether it's dunya-related matters or akhirah, we still have to be respectful towards them at all times, whether they're Muslims or non-Muslims. It doesn't give us the license to be rude to them or yell back at them. So Ibrahim alayhi salam treated his father very well, with utmost respect. However, the father responded by saying, Ya Ibrahim, if you do not stop inviting me to Islam, I'm going to stone you to death. Subhanallah. What a gentleman Ibrahim alayhi salam is, despite the harsh attitude of his father, he still conveys peace to him. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us this kind of patience that we're able to act positively even in the most negative kind of situations. So next, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions to us about the generations who neglected salah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that after them came generations who neglected their salah and followed their lusts. They will suffer the consequences, except for those who repent, believe, and act righteously. So delaying salah or missing salah or being neglectful about salah is something which is a serious offense. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is presenting to us stories of prophets, one after another, so that we can learn to look into our mistakes and fix them by following the legacy of our prophets. We learned that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was once shown a man whose head was being crushed with a stone, and when he asked about it, that, Ya Allah, why is this man's head being crushed with a stone? He was informed that this is the person who learned the Quran but never acted upon it. And he slept, ignoring the fard prayer. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us, because salah is something many of us are negligent about, whether it's our youth, whether it's us, or whether it's our elders. This is something we shouldn't be careless about. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us. So moving on to the next passage, ayah 88 till 95. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions to us about Isa alayhi salam. And they say, Ar-Rahman has fathered a child. By the way, this surah, when we take a look at this surah, the theme of Ar-Rahman is highlighted to us over and over again in this surah. Subhanallah. The fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Ar-Rahman. The word Ar-Rahman is mentioned 15 times. Why is that so? Because this surah is named after Maryam, who is held with high prestige by all Christians. Christianity is known as the religion of love, and the New Testament defines God as love. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala introduces himself as Ar-Rahman in this surah, God of love, mercy, and compassion. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that they say, meaning the people say, Ar-Rahman has fathered a child. And this is one of the major beliefs of the Christians, that they think that Isa alayhi salam is the son of God because he was born without human intervention. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responds to their claim by saying, you have invented something outrageous, at which the heavens almost rupture, the earth splits, and the mountains fall and crumble, because they attribute a child to their Lord. It's not proper for Ar-Rahman to have a child. So subhanAllah, the conclusion of the surah presents to us an emphasis upon Tawheed. Since Surah Maryam is a Makki surah, the disbelievers of Makkah are being reprimanded because they considered the angels to be the daughters of Allah. It was also a reprimand towards the Christians because they claim that Jesus is the Son of God. Plus, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala corrected the beliefs of some of the sects of Jews who proclaimed Uzair alayhi salam to be the son of God. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, it's not possible for Allah to have a son, because then Allah would cease to be God if he has partners. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one. قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. He is one and only, without any partners. So that brings us to the conclusion of Surah Maryam. When we look at Maryam alayhi salam and her legacy, we come to know that Maryam alayhi salam belonged to a noble lineage, born to righteous parents, Imran and Hannah, who came from the lineage of Prophet Dawood alayhi salam. And looking at Maryam alayhi salam, what we learn is that when we have parents who are righteous, when we follow their legacy by following chastity and righteousness, then inshallah, it has an impact on our children, just like Isa alayhi salam. So if we want piety and subhanallah, righteousness to continue in our generation down the line, in our progeny, then we need to work hard today. We need to be steadfast on our faith today, so that inshallah, our generation can live and die upon Islam. Whether they are born in the times of Dajjal, whether they are born in the times of Gog and Magog, inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will protect their faith. So some of the action points from Surah Maryam are mentioned over here. Again, subhanallah, lots of gems to learn, but the main theme is we should try to take an example of this noble woman, Maryam alayhi salam, and try to follow her chastity and piety. Allahumma ameen. Next surah that we have in this juz is Surah Taha. And again, the period of its revelation is the same as that of Surah Maryam. So probably it's possible that it was sent down during the migration to Habasha or just after it. Anyhow, It's certain that this surah was revealed before Umar radiallahu an embraced Islam. And subhanAllah, the beginning ayat of Surah Taha are the ones that softened the heart of Umar radiallahu an. The person who had set out with the sole intention to kill Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam ended up accepting Islam after reciting ayat of this surah. Subhanallah. So let's read Surah Taha from the lens of Umar radiallahu an and see the iman rush that it can bring to our hearts, inshallah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala starts off this surah by saying, Taha ma anzalna alayka al-Qur'ana litashqa. We did not reveal the Quran to you to make you suffer, but only as a reminder for him who fears. Meaning, this Quran is not here to burden us, to make our lives difficult. Rather, it has come to solve our problems, to take us out from the shackles of trends and culture and all the sorts of things that we believe in and we follow, despite having any evidence to it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that we should read the Quran and use it to ease our lives and be guided. Ayah number 9 till 14 presents to us the most epic conversation that ever happened. The conversation of Musa alayhi salam with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions to us the timeline when he was migrating from Madian and going back to Egypt. On his way, he saw a fire. He thought to himself, perhaps it can be a torch that I can use for some light or heat ourselves and, subhanAllah, be comfortable on this cold night. That's when he approached the fire and he came near to it, he realized that this was just nur, this was just light. And who was speaking behind it? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, Innani ana Allahu la ilaha illa ana fa'budni wa aqimis salata li dhikri. Meaning when you pray salah, when you remember Allah, that's when you are going to be my true abd. So salah is for the purpose of remembering Allah. That is the access code for us to come closer to Allah. But unfortunately, during salah is the time when we're most distracted. Our mind is engrossed in remembering every single thing other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive us. Ayah number 25 till 29. Musa alayhi salam asks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for sharh sadr. Because when we have sharh sadr, then we have clarity. So Musa alayhi salam asks Allah, Ya Allah, put my heart at peace for me and ease my task for me. What was the task he's mentioning over here? The task of presenting Islam to Fir'aun, one of the tyrants of that ummah. So Musa alayhi salam, when he's given this task by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to invite Fir'aun to Islam, Musa alayhi salam makes a dua to have peace in his heart, to have expansion in his sadr. Because when we have, subhanAllah, the help of Allah, that's when we have clarity. When we have clarity, that's when we have more conviction. And it's mentioned that Musa alayhi salam used to stutter a lot. So he also asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for fluency in speech, to have the ability to communicate effectively so that people can understand his message. And subhanAllah, this is the dua that we should also recite anytime we're about to present something, anytime we're about to communicate to people something difficult, something challenging. We should always ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us communicate the haqq in the right manner. So what should we say? رَبِّ اشْرَحْ لِي صَدْرِي وَيَسِّرْ لِي أَمْرِي وَاحْلُلْ عُقْدَةً مِّن لِّسَانِي يَفْقَهُ قَوْلِي وَاجْعَلْ لِي وَزِيرًا مِّنْ أَهْلِي This was the dua that Musa alayhi salam added by asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make Harun his helper, a vizier for him, an assistant for him. And from this we learn that because of the dua of Musa alayhi salam, prophethood was granted to his brother. Meaning, when we make dua, we should ask for the same khair to be given to our siblings as well, because they have a right upon us as well. Moving on to ayah number 43 to 44, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us effective communication skills. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions to Musa alayhi salam, go to Fir'aun because he has tyrannized, but speak to him nicely. Perhaps he will remember or have some fear. Just think about it. Allah commands him to go to Fir'aun. And what's the instruction given? Be gentle with the man who claims to be God. SubhanAllah, think about it. Even though Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knew the fate of Fir'aun, yet this commandment is given to Musa alayhi salam. Because when we talk to people, the way we act with people, that has an impact on others. If we are kind to them, if we are compassionate towards them, it attracts them towards the message that we have to present. So if this command is given to Musa alayhi salam regarding Fir'aun, what about the rest of the people? What about the people that we deal with on a daily basis, whether it's our parents, spouse, siblings, friends, relatives? What about them? Do we have the right to speak harshly with them? Do we have the right to ignore their salam and not respond to them? Of course not. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us all. Passage number 95 till 98. So all this time in Surah Taha, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions to us the story about Musa alayhi salam. So the entire story is presented to us about the time when Musa alayhi salam was successful against Fir'aun. Fir'aun died as a non-believer and drowned in the Red Sea. The Israelites crossed the Red Sea and Musa alayhi salam goes to Mount Tur in order to speak to Allah. And that's when he receives the guidelines of Torah. So what actually happened? Musa alayhi salam was called by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for a visit of 30 days and 30 nights. And that's what he informed his people, that that's how long I'm going to be gone. So wait for me, and I'm appointing Harun to be your leader during my absence. But what happened when Musa alayhi salam went to Mount Tur, this meeting was extended for 10 more days. So for 40 days, Musa alayhi salam was absent. The people started wondering, what happened? Where is Musa? Wasn't he supposed to come in 30 days? Where is he? And that's when a person by the name of Samiri initiated shirk amongst the people of Israelites and invited them to associate partners with Allah, to commit shirk. And even though Harun alayhi salam, being the brother of Musa alayhi salam and being a prophet, advised the people against shirk, tried his best to stop them from committing kufr, yet all his efforts were useless. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions to us that since Samiri committed this grave act of initiating shirk amongst the children of Israel, he was punished with a grave punishment. What was his punishment? That he was given a contagious disease such that all day long he would say, La misas, don't touch me, don't touch me. So subhanAllah, he would feel so feverish that if someone would come near him, they would start feeling feverish as well. So basically, it was a contagious disease that required him to stay in quarantine, that required him to stay in isolation. And that's how he was punished, and he passed away in that state. And that teaches us the gravity of initiating something evil. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect all of us. So ayah number 124 to 126. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us, calls us to live by the Quran. Because when we look at the examples that are presented to us in this surah, for instance, Fir'aun, he turned away from the dhikr of Allah. What was his end? He doomed. So even though he had wealth, success, fame, yet his life became constricted for him in the end. And what's the use of such a life if the ending is so evil? Why do we see such a rise in suicide rates, eating disorders? Because there's a big void. Our heart wants spiritual nourishment, and our mind wants to satisfy desires. And there's a complete disconnect. So how can we bring it solace when we fulfill our desires according to the spiritual nourishment? And the spiritual nourishment can only be achieved through the dhikr of Allah. So what happens when a person has a bad ending? The life becomes constricted for him. Plus, even the grave becomes constricted for him. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to enable us to live by the Quran so that our grave can be filled with nur, so that we are accompanied by the most beautiful looking angels, and so that we are resurrected in a state that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with us. So it's upon us, which path do we choose? Do we choose the path of righteousness or not? May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect our iman and keep us steadfast upon Islam. Ameen. With that said, we will conclude. Subhanak Allahumma wa bihamdik. Nashhadu wa la ilaha illa ant. Nastaghfiruka, nastaghfiruka, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار اللهم آنس وحشتي في قبري اللهم ارحمني بالقرآن العظيم واجعله لي إماما ونورا وهدى ورحمة اللهم ذكرني منه ما نسيت وعلمني منه ما جهلت ورزقني تلاوته آناء الليل وآناء النهار واجعله لي حجة يا رب العالمين آمين ثم آمين السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته